My name is Paige Strite, and this is my presentation on women's suffrage. The first women's rights convention was held in Sequoia Falls, New York on July 19th and 20th of 1848. The convention was organized by the women Elizabeth Cady Stanton, Lucretia Mott, Martha C. Wright, Marianne McClintock. The first day of the convention, July 19th, was exclusively held for the women who were earnestly invited to attend, and on the second day, July 20th, the public was presented to be invited and present. During the convention, they created the Declaration of Sentiments, which was an ode to the Declaration of Independence. A piece from that is, "We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men and women are created equal and endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights, that among us these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness." The convention was used to discuss the social, civil, and religious conditions and rights of women. The year was 1869. The new group, American Women's Suffrage Association. It was founded by Lucy Stone in Boston, New York. This group, similar to the one before, now not only supported the women's suffrage movement, but also the African American men's right to vote as well. They worked with abolitionist leaders such as Frederick Douglass. They saw the best way to gain support was to work together. Many women of color felt as though neither group spoke of their needs, and that is when the founder, Ida B. Wells, founded the National Association of Colored Women's Club. So some black suffragettes are Ida B. Wells, Frances Harper, and Sojourner Truth. They knew when Susan B. Anthony withdrew her support for African Americans that they most likely needed to wait for another political movement. The 15th Amendment, created in 1869, gave the African American men the right to vote regardless of race, color, or previous condition of servitude. This said nothing of the female gender. Previous to the 14th and 15th Amendment, both parties, the suffrage movement and the abolitionist movement, knew if they worked together and united, then whoever gained the right to vote first would in turn vote for the other group to gain suffrage. They thought both groups shared a similar goal, therefore they could relate and would gain the support of the other groups. Once the 14th and 15th Amendments were passed, women like Susan B. Anthony and Elizabeth Cady Stanton famously opposed the amendments, displaying elitist and racial hierarchy. I feel it's important to note, like I stated earlier with Susan B. Anthony, she did support the amendments previous to when they were official. However, once they were passed, she was upset that the African Americans could vote before the white woman could. Their support was dropped to further their political agenda, and also due to the push from Southern white women in particular. In 1878, a formal amendment is made for women's suffrage and has made its way to the Senate. However, it has very little momentum. All the while, the movement starts heating up with marches and protests at the White House, and later there will even be a hunger strike in the prisons after longtime suffragette Alice Paul was arrested and tortured for demanding the right to vote. A vocal leader of the suffrage movement was Alice Paul. After studying in England, she witnessed some of the women's suffrage efforts there, and she saw their tactics were a lot more aggressive than those in America. That was due to the previous suffragettes were too afraid to take it that far. So when she came back to America, she joined the National American Women's Suffrage Association, where she led the Washington, D.C. chapter. She eventually split from the National American Women's Suffrage Association and formed the National Women's Party. Some of the methods she picked up from Europe were picketing, which they did in front of the White House, and hunger strikes. Alice Paul organized a large hunger strike in the prisons when she was arrested and tortured for protesting the right to vote. And they had brought in a psychologist who threatened to put her in a psych ward and force-fed her. Turning point of the movement. Well, some critics believe that the Great War could put a halt to the women's suffrage movement. Others believe this could be a push in the right direction, and that was proved to be true when President Wilson, reluctantly I might add, showed his support for the movement. Partially, it's due to the estimated 9 million women who joined the war efforts, but it is said to be partially because he was constantly embarrassed by suffragettes like Alice Paul. The reason for this is because all of the eligible men who could go to war were drafted into the war, and that left women to be the people who picked up work in the factories, building things for the army in the war. Or there would be women who would go and serve as nurses and other medical. Important things to note about voting. In the presidential election of 1872, Susan B. Anthony and her sisters voted. However, Susan B. Anthony was arrested, tried, and then fined $100. She refused to pay the fine, although it was never enforced. In 1910, several states, mainly Western, struck the word male from their voter clause in their constitutions, allowing women to vote. This made a lot of people realize it wasn't going to be as disastrous as they had previously thought. Another thing to note, since voting was a state issue, it makes sense that it was also a state issue on who could run in the office. Women could run for a local or national office, and when they did, they always pushed for equality. A prime example is Victoria Woodhull, who was a suffragist and presidential candidate. She actually ran for office in the Equal Rights Party in 1872. She supported women's suffrage and equal rights. However, that is not the only thing Victoria Woodhull did. She was also the first woman to own a brokerage firm on Wall Street and the first woman to start a weekly newspaper. Although some women were voting in the 1910s, there was still a way to go. On May 21st of 1919, the House of Representatives passed the amendment, which 2 weeks later the Senate followed. When Tennessee became the 36th state to ratify the amendment on August 18th of 1920, the 19th Amendment was officially passed, granting all women the right to vote, no matter where they were in the United States.